All right, welcome everyone. Looking forward to a great discussion today about B2B tech and how AI is impacting the buyer journey. We got a great lineup of speakers. You're going to hear from each over the course of the next hour, and then we're bringing all the speakers up on stage towards the end of the webinar to answer questions from you all. So if you orient yourself towards the chat on the right in the webinar, would love to get questions from the attendees throughout the course of the webinar. Some of the speakers will be available to answer during the webinar, but we're going to queue up some questions for the panel at the end. By way of introduction, my name is Mike Gallion. I'm Chief Product Officer here at TrustRadius. A little overview of TrustRadius: started as a peer review site for B2B tech, has evolved over the last 10 or so years with a mission to help buyers make high confidence decisions about their B2B tech. And it's our goal to help vendors reach those in-market buyers. So before we get started, I want to take a minute to discuss kind of the pace of innovation we're seeing with AI. As you can probably tell from the gray hairs on my head, I've seen my share of innovation over the last couple of decades. And you look at some of the waves of innovation, you think about kind of the onset of the Web 1.0. This was a time companies were first coming onto the internet, building a presence, kind of evolving into Web 2.0, which was really kind of more around enabling not only employees within their organizations, but consumers online. And that, of course, in our industry led to, SaaS, or software as a service, e-commerce, social, mobile, cloud. These are all like innovation waves. But if you think about, you look back on those innovation waves, those are measured in many years. There was a lot of infrastructure to be built, a lot of kind of behavior change that had to happen. And at the time, some of them felt kind of really quick and disruptive. But, in my experience, I'd say what we've seen over the last kind of 18 to 24 months with AI, I think is the fastest pace of innovation I've seen. And that brings disruption. Innovation typically can bring disruption. And that certainly raises a lot of, questions and uncertainty. Like, we're all kind of in the business of running kind of a company or a successful operation. But, there's a lot of uncertainty. So, how do we make sense of it all? So TrustRadius has spent over a decade researching buyer trends. If we go to the next slide, and we just published our annual research report on buyers. So we survey thousands of buyers every year, and we're really looking at those trends year over year. You can download this on TrustRadius, and I think we're going to drop a link in here for you as well in the webinar. So I want to kind of go through a couple highlights from the report. There's a lot of great data, so definitely download it. It's free. You can check it out. But we go to the next slide. One of the big trends we've seen over the last year, 40% of buyers today say it's easier to find the info that they need because of AI. And that's double from what we saw last year. We're also seeing kind of increasing trust with AI. 80% report they trust AI at least some of the time. Now, that being said, if we go to the next slide, buyers who use AI most frequently, 62% use fact checking very often or always. And so trust with AI kind of still evolving. And then our final slide, kind of last highlight I'd like to call out, we also surveyed vendors and their perception of AI's impact. And by and large, there's a perception that AI is helping buyers find the info that they need. So vendors believe AI has had mostly a positive impact. So there's a lot to unpack. Fortunately, we've got some fantastic subject matter experts that can help us do that over the course of the next hour. So with that, I'd like to bring our first speaker on stage, and happy to introduce Viola Eva. Viola is the founder of Flow Agency and a podcast host. She has an extensive background in B2B, including SEO, content marketing, and performance marketing. Hey, Viola, welcome. Where are you joining us from today?
Hey, Mike. So excited to be here. I'm calling in from Berlin, Germany, as we're like they now like to say a remote native agency. And yeah, we predominantly work with tech companies and SaaS. And so excited to share today.
Well, that's great. Thanks for joining us. I know the time zone's probably it's probably late for you there, so appreciate your flexibility for sure. So, Viola, you've worked with B2B tech clients on optimizing their digital presence. With the growing role of LLMs and AI overviews in search, kind of what changes have you seen, and how do you think companies should rethink their approach?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, there's been a lot going on over the last 2 years. And so what I notice is a few major kind of like through lines or trends. So one is on kind of like classic search. If we think about classic search, classic SEO, kind of like demand capture, we think about Google, we think about Bing. And that has a massive AI component now with Google's AI overview. It first came out in May of last year in the US, then rolled out in more than 100 countries in Q4 of last year. And since March, us Europeans and everyone in the EU also has Google's AI overview. So you can imagine all the Europeans are having the shock right now that Americans had last year.
Right.
And we've run some data, and it's pretty much everywhere. Even bottom of funnel transactional queries in 50% of the cases it shows up. For top of funnel, maybe 2 and 3 searches now have Google AI overview. And it's huge. It takes up a lot of real estate in page one, and it really pushes the classic organic blue link below the fold. And I think that's the most interesting in this development is that we've really transformed from expecting search results as a prioritized list that we need to click through and search and find our answer. Like now, we're getting that complete comprehensive answer and we're getting it all the time. But it also means for us, as SaaS marketers, as B2B marketers, is if we want to capture demand, if we want people to find us when they're ready to buy, we really need to think about search more holistically. We need to think about Google and Bing and ChatGPT search and Perplexity. And we need to think about, that classic organic blue link. We need to think about AI overview, images, videos, etc. Like we really want to be everywhere these days. And then the second trend is just like over the last 6 months specifically, we see a lot more referral traffic from LLMs, which has a lot to do with the rollout of ChatGPT search in October. But I would guess that most of the people who are at the webinar here today probably had a few conversions, SQLs, and opportunities come in from LLMs recently. And they know that either from GA4 or through self-reported attribution. But now that that is starting to happen, I see a lot more interest of marketers actually to start moving and optimizing for AI search.
That's great. Yeah, your commentary specifically on Google's AI overviews. That's one of the interesting things I think for this pace of innovation. You look at the adoption of ChatGPT and Perplexity. While it's impressive, it's dwarfed by kind of Google's AI overviews. And I think that's a really interesting thing that's driving this pace of change is that users, for the most part, are doing what they've done for decades. They've got a question and they need to go find some information. And they're going to start and they're going to go to Google and they're going to put in their question or their query. And the AI overviews, whether they realize it or not, are now starting to answer those questions. So, I think with that, what's kind of interesting is you mentioned the predominance of AI overviews pushing kind of the traditional organic blue links down. Certainly answering the question, when we think about zero-click searches or content, more of the top of funnel searches are being answered by the LLMs and, especially right. Google's AI overview. So kind of with that, what shift or recommendations for companies that you guys are working with in terms of optimizing deeper funnel conversion?
You're absolutely right. I think if you're a SaaS company and you're currently losing organic traffic, I would want to place a bet that you're losing organic traffic to the AI overview, and you're probably losing traffic to the AI overview for kind of top of funnel, educational, what is best practices, kind of this very, very broad stuff. And so I think, to be honest, it's kind of fair, I suppose. You have a generic question, people are asking, you have generic content, why not? The AI overview is kind of faster. And so I think for evolving your content strategy, I really want to invite marketers to really think a lot more about specificity. For a long, long time, I think our content marketing strategy, specifically our SEO strategy, was driven by keywords, was driven by search volume. And I think these are not very interesting decision making metrics anymore. And so I want to invite specificity. That means that if you're thinking about creating content, creating something that answers specific questions to your product. So whether that's use case, whether that's problems that you solved. And I would like for us to get much more inspired by our sales teams, by customer success, by your best customers, and not search volume. So really intent first and deep, meaningful questions moving forward. And the second thing is if you're now catching yourself and you're like, I don't have a lot of that stuff. So, of course, we want to start creating it. But two, there's probably an opportunity right now for a content audit and actually going through your website and seeing, like, how much stuff do I actually have that is up to date, relevant, original, insightful? And how much stuff do I have that I published 5 years ago, haven't updated since then? It's old messaging, it's not relevant, it's not ranking. And so that kind of like focus on specificity is what I would encourage moving forward. Because for all of the other stuff, AI overview is answering anyway. There's no reason for people to come to your website for that other stuff.
Yeah, and you touched on like how important content is. Content audit is something we should be doing anyway, but now in this new world, it's through a new lens. To your point of kind of what are those more specific questions or use case, questions that may come in. So I think that's really interesting. And so kind of with the shift in the buyer behavior we're seeing, you work with a lot of companies. Like what are you hearing from vendors over the last 6 to 12 months? Like what are they asking for?
Yeah. I think like 2 years ago, right, we were all talking about ChatGPT, Claude, like the original models. I want to say classic LLM. I can't believe we already have a classic LLM 2 years in, but the one that wasn't about search. And then the last 6 months, we've been talking a lot about LLMs with search, ChatGPT, search perplexity. And I think now we're having conversations about how to gain more visibility, how to track the visibility, how to track conversions that are coming from this. So I think as it comes to our marketing operations, these are the questions that marketing leaders are trying to answer right now. And then I think the next thing, where are we going? Where's the future heading? Is really, really interesting. Is about deep research. ChatGPT's deep research tool, Gemini's deep research tool that take a lot longer to process their answer, but the answers are a lot more sophisticated, a lot more detailed. And I think that the other thing that's emerging on the horizon is the whole discussion around agents. Yeah. And what type of incentive do I even have to produce content on my website if it never even gets read by a human and only gets visited by an agent? And I think that has like confusing incentives and implications as well. And I think people are just starting to ask these questions over the last few months.
Yeah, I was at Google Next a couple of weeks ago, and some of the announcements and launches there around agentic frameworks were really exciting. I think for me, what it means for us, B2B marketers, is we really need to understand where our audience is going. I think traditional SEO will, still be a component. It used to be the only or the primary component, right? And primarily one vendor, Google. I think for us, it's really thinking about how buyers are going to, find information in this new world, and content's a big part of that as well. In a recent blog post, so for attendees, you should check out Viola's blog post. She's got a lot of great insights there. But one of the things that you stated was GEO, so generative engine optimization, is the new SEO, and describes several impact areas on B2B marketing. One was around creating original, unique, research-backed, kind of in-depth content. In some ways, this kind of feels like a strategy at the height of SEO optimization. What's different this time around?
Well, great. Yeah, firstly, I'm not married to either of these terms, whether that's SEO, GEO, LLMO, AIO, however this new discipline of marketing is going to end up being named. And the first thing that I want to say in this whole debate is search is really everywhere, and I don't think search is dying. We think about Google a lot, but there's search in YouTube, there's search in TikTok. If we want to book a hotel, we go to booking.com. If we want a product, we go to Amazon. If we want a how-to video, we go to YouTube. And so I think it's not so much a debate of whether or not search is dying. Search is really everywhere. It's more about moving to where people are now. What platforms are they using? What platforms are they using for all asks? The reason why these platforms work so well is also they do a lot more than search, right? That they like another search engine probably could have not done to Google what these platforms do, that they do so much more. But to your question, I really think, SEO is now geo or SEO is now LLMO. I think it's an evolution. I think search is diversifying. The practices that we need to do are advancing. And you're right. I think a lot of the things we should have been doing all along. But I just think somewhere along the way, we got sidetracked with SEO. And we somehow thought SEO means creating top of funnel fluff, high search volume content that's barely related to our brand. And so I think in this way, I'm just saying, like, our content marketing, we should have done this all along. Speak to our customers, answer their questions, be precise, feature our subject matter experts. So yeah, I agree. It's not necessarily new. I think it's more a reminder that, this is what kind of mattered all along.
That's great. I think kind of a follow-on question to that is the muscle memory a lot of us have around, to your point, SEO and how we measure success in terms of traffic. Like, kind of in this new world, what are you seeing with your clients? Kind of what are the key metrics or the KPIs, and how do you retrain kind of off kind of the traditional KPIs?
Totally. I mean, I wish we would have always held SEO accountable, not just for traffic, but also for conversions and, quality of leads and opportunity generated. I think in many ways, SEO's got to get away with being measured by traffic for a long, long time. But I think especially if we think about bottom of funnel search, demand capture, those people actively buying, conversions and traffic are still really, really good metrics. For middle and top of funnel, I do think, oddly enough, the value of impressions, like, I think for long, we've always talked about impression being a vanity metric. And I always told my team not to report on impressions. But I think I'm changing my opinion right now, is in the sense that if we're recognizing that Google's AI overview is everywhere and people are using ChatGPT search and all that, I want to have insight into how often am I appearing? Meaning, how often am I a citation or source? How often am I a link? But also, how often am I being mentioned? If someone types performance management software, onboarding software, am I being mentioned by these tools? And luckily, everyone is trying to get an LLM listening tool and LLM monitoring on the market right now. And so what we had to do pretty manually, even a few months ago, like, we can now do with different tools. And so I think that is the shift. The idea is still the same. We want to have real estate on page one. We want to be where people are searching. But now we're probably measuring that based on mentions and citations much more than before.
Yeah, and I think your point on there are different models and there are different tools. Kind of in traditional SEO, it was Google, and Google had everything instrumented for you to, like, measure the things that mattered and change your rankings and your presence on SERP as well. But now we're in a new world. There are a lot of different tools, and buyers are searching in a lot of different places. So really good commentary there. Kind of shifting gears here, back to kind of what we were talking about around GEO. You work, again, with a lot of companies. Do you think marketers really understand kind of the technical side of GEO, things like enabling AI crawlers, backlinks, or third-party site strategy? Kind of who's owning that today? Is that becoming a shared responsibility across marketing, sales, product, or do you see kind of SEO roles, traditional SEO roles, evolving into kind of full GEO ownership?
Sure. I mean, I would argue that SEOs have been studying search, for decades, and they understand kind of like searching, information retrieval, prioritization, indexing really well. But I might be biased here since I am an SEO. That being said, I think the important thing to understand from a technical perspective is that if you have a big, convoluted website, Google had already problems with this, especially JavaScript and all that was already hard for Google. The AI crawlers, are very, very bad at this. You really need to give them HTML clean code in a very, very fast way. If you're loading a bunch of like tracking scripts, the site is slow, there's JavaScript to render, you're basically already out. They don't have the time or capabilities to do that so quickly. So I think that is probably a very technical kind of like SEO website manager problem to solve. And then otherwise, I agree. It's changed a lot more. SEO used to be about your own website and turning that into an authority and publishing your own content and maybe getting a few backlinks. But the LLMs and AI overview, they never just cite one source. They always create their answer based on a variety of sources. And so it's not just about your own website. It's also about how does everyone else talk about you? How is your digital footprint? And so making sure that there's an alignment between the stuff that you have on your website and, for example, your social profiles, but also like your review sites. Is the description up to date? Are you in the right category? Do the reviews even talk about the things that are relevant today? Like these sort of things matter more and more because, it's not just about your own website as that one source. It matters a lot where you're being discussed and are you in contextual proximity to the topics that you want to be appearing for. And I do think that is a joint effort and much more going into PR territory, product marketing territory than we maybe expect SEO to typically be.
Got it. All right. Fantastic. A lot of great insights, Viola. Thank you. We're going to bring you back later for the Q&A with the panel, where we'll take questions from the attendees here later in the session. So thank you for these insights. We'll see you back soon.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, now let's bring on our next speaker, Drew Neiser. Drew is also a podcast host, as well as the CEO and CMO of CMO Huddles. Welcome, Drew. Where are you joining us from today?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me. I am at the world headquarters in New York City of CMO Huddles.
All right, on. Excellent. Well, hopefully you're getting some good weather there. I'm in Austin, and the weather's fantastic today.
We are indeed. Yeah, it's lovely.
Excellent. Well, Drew, you talk to a lot of CMOs and marketing leaders. When it comes to kind of B2B marketing, there's been a lot of disruption with AI, like we've talked about here, and it's happening quickly. What are the kind of the biggest challenge you see, kind of the CMOs and the marketing leaders you're talking to? Like, what are the biggest challenges they're facing?
Yeah, and it is a perfect storm because you've got this perception out there among executives, non-marketing, that that AI can accelerate in a CMO's ability to do more with less. So more with less was the March of 2025 forward, and now it's gone crazy. And the sort of second one, and I think we'll go through these one at a time. The speed of the technology that AI is coming is actually creating some paralyzing moments for CMOs, and that's worth talking a little bit about. And then Viola talked about this, but I have a slightly different perspective, which on the steady decline of organic search traffic. So those are the big three. I think we should go through them.
Yeah, let's unpack those. So accelerating the expectations that they can do more with less. Like let's hear more about that.
Yeah. So literally, I wrote a post about this on LinkedIn last Saturday in one of my rants, and a CEO said to a CMO, "I think you can do with 80% less people in your department." Just like that, out of the blue. And no doubt that CEO had probably just listened to Sam Altman, who was describing billion-dollar companies with one employee, right? And so the notion that you could suddenly reduce the staff, and it's so problematic for so many reasons, but I think that what I think a lot of CMOs are trying to do is say, wow, I can do so much more with the people I have, assuming they're embracing these tools. What would happen if we could be 3 or 4x more productive? How much more could we drive? So, but the CEO PE firm perspective on this is, no, just cut staff.
Yeah, you had a interesting, in one of your recent podcasts, and I think you referenced something we'll hear from Lisa maybe later, kind of around the digital twin. That's kind of fun what you did there with that podcast. But do more with less. Well, kind of on the next theme, one of the words you used stood out to me is, the speed of tech innovation can be paralyzing. Like that paralyzing component, there's almost a deer in headlights of, wow, what do we do here? So kind of let's unpack that one a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've got every CMO I know has at some stage of adoption of these tools. And the challenge is, yeah, we can give everybody in marketing ChatGPT, and they can do all sorts of amazing things. But do we invest in other larger systems to try to transform the organization? And well, but there's this new thing coming, and then there's this new thing coming. And so, for example, one of the conversations, that again, another ludicrous thing is, hey, just replace all your BDRs with bots. It's a great example of what's happening out there. What I have noticed, and this isn't completely true across the board, is it's a little easier for smaller companies because they can do a few things with generative AI that have a huge impact on their business, right? Whereas if you're a giant company, this is hard. And there's a lot of things involved that whether it's the security of the data, the security of your customer data, where it's just easier. And it's funny. I mean, this comes up a lot now as vibe coding. We're just creating sort of solutions in the marketing department where you used to have to get in line for that. So anyway, you've got, it's this, I'm a little bit paralyzed, but I'm also doing really, really cool things. And it's happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And then we got this last one with the search traffic,
Right.
which, you talked a lot about it, but it's really important. So I want to go back to it a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So it's early. I'm going to use geo because I've been seeing that a lot, really early days. And there's a lot of speculation on what impacts LLMs, but really no one actually knows because there aren't really tools yet. And there hasn't been enough time. Whereas with SEO, we kind of knew what it would do because you had SEMrush and you could see the results. We're ranking 10, now we're ranking 1. Boom, we made some improvement. So, based on, I've talked to a number of folks who in theory are experts. But what they don't have is we did these 4 things and look what happened. Because we're not quite there yet. And maybe what Viola said about some of those tools coming out that will actually be able to help us track. But it feels like there's the best guess right now is you need extensive Q&As. And Viola mentioned, but it's literally like thinking, what is every single question a prospect might ask in a generative AI tool? And you need to literally answer that question. You need to ask it and answer it. There are some new types of content in terms of how they're formatted. So they are, and Viola mentioned that, but it's how to make it easy for the LLMs because they do look at data differently.
Well, and that kind of cues up a broader question of like, how are the CMOs adjusting kind of content strategy? Viola kind of touched on the importance of content, but marketing leaders you're talking to, kind of how are they adjusting their content strategy with AI to become more discoverable in the buyer journey? You kind of touched on this, but
so there's a little bit more. Look, the best guess also is evolved SEO strategies. It's still about being discovered based on having better content that you need. And then there's an interesting one here that folks are speculating could actually work, which is you feed the generative engine the information that you want. So I type in CMO Huddles is the #1 B2B CMO community, and I do it a lot. And so one would wonder after a period of time, because I don't have it in a private sandbox and I can reinforce that with other data, eventually do the tools actually start to believe me and others who might put that in there. So there's some question about whether or not that will work. There are people who are claiming that does work. So you've got those 4 things about lots of Q&As, lots of content. But I think there's another thing to think about right now, which is if you have less site traffic, right? You have fewer visitors coming to your website, then you need to really make the most of those folks. Right. And a current website with the architecture, we've got the little thing on the sort of various sections and so forth. The likelihood of a customer actually finding the information that they want is really thin, other than the pricing page, right? Maybe there's a demo button, but they have questions. And so it's funny, we're testing right now. We do a lot of testing on our 2 websites that we operate. One is renegademarketing.com, which is a content website that supports CMO Huddles. We have tested a tool called webless.ai, which is a persistent search bar at the bottom, and you can ask it anything, and it will serve up an answer, a smart answer based on all the content on the website, plus world's base of knowledge, and suggest content from the website. And so we've done that for, I guess we've been a month. We have seen time on website so far double. And we saw other content is being discovered that wasn't being discovered, older content that's still relevant, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that point you made, it's really kind of, you know, Viola talked about rethinking your content strategy. You've touched on that, but then there's also an engagement for the people who are coming to your site, rethinking how you meet their needs and engagement. Yeah.
And there's this other part of this thing we're testing right now where, you know, everybody's had a conversational bot on their machine, and most of us hate those things because they're not very smart. They're not very helpful. And you sort of, so can I set up a demo for you? So we're testing something called salespeak.ai on cmohuddles.com. And it's it's a search bar that looks kind of like a search bar, but it populates questions, a series of questions already for you. And you can click on those, or you can answer or ask your own. And it's kind of amazing. And the important part of it is not that it's probably helping folks discover the content that they're looking for and answering their questions, is the knowledge that we gain about the questions that they actually care about. Yeah. And I don't think marketers know that very well, right?
Yeah, that becomes a really valuable signal, right? Because, you know, as marketers, we can try to think of the questions they might ask, but when they're telling us the questions that we haven't thought of, that's a really important input.
And what's so interesting about generative AI and these kinds of things is that in this particular case, the bot keeps learning.
Yeah, so it's training. Yeah.
Right. And so it's training on the questions, and it's also training. Eventually, it does want to get someone to sign up for a free starter program, but it is training on that. So eventually it'll look and go, oh, this is the pattern. This question was the trigger.
Yeah.
So, and you don't want to push for the sale until that person has actually asked the question that says, oh, okay, how much does this cost? Or whatever is the real true buyer signal. So anyway, it's an interesting, so I think that websites as we know it need to be radically rethought.
Yeah, that's, you know, a fascinating point. You know, I kind of referenced the Trust Radius B2B, you know, kind of buying research that we do every year. And it's definitely been a trend for years now where buyers want to self-discover, you know, they want to self-educate, self-discover. And this isn't something we want to hear, but they don't want to talk to a salesperson, you know, until they're ready to talk to a salesperson. And to your point, I mean, we got to rethink how we engage buyers so that we're not forcing them down a path they don't want to go down. And this is an opportunity to help answer questions that they have.
Yeah. And the truth is they'd rather talk with this bot as long as it's really smart than they would a human until they're ready to talk to a human, which is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, kind of when we look at, we've been talking a lot about the LLMs and AI overviews, but, you know, things are advancing quickly with AI. Kind of, are there any kind of new emerging opportunities that you find really interesting?
So, you know, this is the problem and the opportunity. AI is everywhere and it could solve every problem. So the CMOs have to, they struggle. What do we prioritize, right? Because it could impact strategy creation. And I know Lisa is going to talk about digital twins. It can impact every aspect of a marketer, and you can't do everything at once. So most CMOs that in our community have started with content. That's the low hanging fruit. It's the easiest thing. Yeah. And they are, I mean, our podcast, we've been able to reduce the production time by 50%.
Wow.
And get more out of them. We're using a tool called Vidosa that finds, we're using Descript to edit and so forth, which is unbelievable. Then we use Vidosa to find the perfect clip. And then you can take that clip and you can put it on YouTube, and we're just blown away that these little shorts are getting discovered and people are watching it. So content is still an important part of this, and it is an expectation that is where CMOs are going to use it. But strategy, workflow, product, customer service, competitive sales enablement, intent, tracking. I was talking to a CMO before this call who is literally using it to take all of their intent signals from all of their things and really, he calls it treasure ops, but to find the treasure in the visitor and all of it. So it's taking a massive amount of inputs and it's sort of scoring it all. And this is something they built themselves.
That's fantastic. That's great. Kind of rounding out, kind of last question again, you work with a lot of CMOs, kind of what are, a couple of takeaways in terms of leading AI initiatives across their organization? What are some kind of takeaways you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, so we had Forrester, Lisa Gailey talk to our community a couple months ago. And I think one of the points that she made was really important, which is to benchmark every process that you have. Find the ones that are repetitive, that are tedious, and no one really gets a lot of, that you can automate with generative AI. That's part one, because you want to be able to show that we did this initiative. We had to spend a little bit of money, but look at the return on that from a process standpoint. I think there's a big opportunity to put a priority on hiring curious-minded people with judgment, because judgment's still going to matter. Right. But they got to be curious, and this notion of AI first is real. Then the last thing I wanted to make a point of, and I wrote about this I think last weekend, which is CMOs are in the driver's seat right now with generative AI adoption at their organizations, and they have an opportunity to, if they do this benchmarking and they test it and they show the value of having built something that actually dramatically saved time and money and efficiency and got more out of it, they can bring this process that they go through to the whole organization. And that really will help them drive business value beyond marketing.
A lot of opportunity ahead of us. All right, Drew, thank you. We're going to kind of bring you back for the full panel later here. And let's bring on our next speaker. I'd like to introduce Lisa Adams, named one of Pavilion's 50 CMOs to watch. Lisa is an AI and executive advisor and fractional CMO with Growth Path Partners, who transforms go-to-market teams for the AI era. She has over 20 years of experience leading go-to-market teams, and we're glad to welcome her here today. Welcome, Lisa. Where are you joining us from?
Hi, Mike. I'm joining you from Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, I love Boulder, Colorado. So you're in a great place. We got a lot of great coverage kind of with all of our speakers around the globe. So thanks for joining us. So you've spoken in the past about how AI should be used by marketers kind of as a thought partner and less of a search engine, that its ability to analyze and problem solve can, help in specific use cases that marketers might not necessarily be thinking about. So kind of my question to you is, how can marketers use AI to better understand their buyers or predict buyer behavior?
Yeah, it's such an important shift in mindset, right? Because I think using AI as a content creator is just scratching the surface. But when we are able to use AI as a thought partner where it can help our ideas become better, or it can help us do analytics and research and get some deeper insights to inform decision making, that's when we really start realizing the power of AI. And when it comes to deeply understanding our customers, that's back to basics, right? And I think when we don't deeply understand our customers, it doesn't matter how much money we put into marketing campaigns or how much AI we do with our campaigns. When we don't have a good strategy, when we don't have good product market fit, then it is literally a waste of money and resources. Think about it. If we don't have good product market fit and we campaign or AI the crap out of our campaigns, I've said this example before, it is literally like doing an all-out campaign for snowblowers in Florida. So I use AI a lot to deeply understand the market. And I put it in chat just a while ago. One of the key things is, leverage. I love leveraging customer reviews, not because this is sponsored by Trust Radius, right? But it gives us insight into the key problems customers have, what they like, what they don't like. And when I put those reviews into AI, there's lots of insights that you can get out of that. So for example, I ask questions like, AI, here are the top 1,000 reviews over the last 6 months for XYZ company. Infer the top of funnel, mid funnel, and bottom of the funnel questions that these customers might ask in AI search. And it will give us something, right? Now,
Right.
is it completely right? No.
Right.
But we can then use human oversight and validate that specific set of questions that was inferred using, validate with sales, validate with actual customers, with our partners, and determine if and how we might craft the questions differently. And then from there, we decide whether we need to craft content that directly answers those questions and or put that content in highly relevant and trustworthy sources. To Viola's point earlier, we have to be everywhere.
Yeah.
We have to be everywhere that's trusted, because AI essentially forms an opinion about us, our brand, ourselves, our leadership team, our products, way before a human being ever does, right? It collects information from everywhere, from communities, social posts, from our website, from publications, from awards, all sorts of things, even from Glassdoor, what our employees are saying about us. And then it forms an opinion and then shares that opinion with the human being. So I use AI a lot, Mike, to really deeply understand customers.
Got it. And I know you specifically, but also Growth Path Partners consults companies and strategy, and how do you operationalize kind of AI? I think I read you've kind of developed a methodology that you refer to as kind of GRACE methodology. Is that something you can kind of shed some light into for the?
Yeah, GRACE is it's partly borrowed from the great Christopher Penn, who, if you guys don't know, is just a brilliant AI strategist and data strategist. GRACE is the acronym that I use to help me with prompting. So people always ask, how do you prompt? And, I'm like, I just talk to it. I talk to it as if it's a really smart assistant that walked in the door, is trained on 85% of the internet, but it has no context around me, my company, my goals, my ideal customer profile, my problems, my motivations, my challenges, right? So I use GRACE to guide it, and G stands for goals, R stands for role, give it a role, A for action, C for context, and then E is for example. So when it learns what a good response is from based on examples, then we have a better shot at getting highly relevant responses back.
That's great. That's great. And I kind of referenced it earlier. One of the things you wrote about earlier, I love kind of your use of the digital twin. Can you kind of describe that for the attendees? I think it's something that we should all be thinking about kind of in our roles. But yeah, I'd love to.
Before we get super tactical on the digital twin, let me just give you a high level around this, right? My belief is that organizations, teams will evolve from one that primarily uses AI as a tool to one that uses AI or guides AI as teammates. So when I think about AI as teammates, and I envision an org chart where there's a combination of human and AI teammates working together. And in fact, I was working with a company where we evolved the marketing team to a 45-member organization where 25 of them are human and 20 of them are AI over a course of 6 months, and achieved some really tremendous results. 35% better campaign performance, up to 75% faster content creation, and then lastly, 98% lead qualification quality, better quality. And today, so that was in January. Today, they have 63 AI teammates. Wow. And then by this summer, they're anticipating 100 AI teammates. So when I talk about AI teammates, like, what do I mean by that, right? So It could be a custom GPT or a Claude project or a Copilot GPT or even a Gemini Gem that we as human beings can train to do very specific tasks. So the task might be, let's say for product marketing, you might have a pitch deck creator or a competitive battle card builder. For campaigns team, you might have a campaign performance analyzer or a content mapper, something like that. So in essence, the human beings build these custom GPTs, they maintain them over time, and they become part of the workflow. The notion of a digital twin is a start of building an AI teammate, because the easiest thing to do is to clone yourself, right? Because we know ourselves the best. And a digital twin, for example, I have Lisa GPT. I have trained Lisa GPT to think like me. So I have uploaded my frameworks, my insights, some of my blog posts, my newsletters, my vision. I've even uploaded like my Myers-Briggs on there, so it knows exactly how I think, right? So when I have an idea, I run that idea by Lisa GPT, and Lisa GPT is designed not just to validate my thinking, but it's designed to be critical of me. I've told it to identify potential blind spots that I might have. I've told it to be highly critical, give me pros and cons, give me different types of perspectives, those types of things. And I've even told it to have a personality that's salty and bold and spicy, just like a bowl of Chex Mix, right?
Yeah.
So I love the fact that with AI, it complements us, because we as human beings, we're not perfect. Like we have, I can't remember much. Like I don't remember where I was last week because I've been traveling a bunch,
Right.
and I can't be my best self every day. Like, I may be sick or I may be frustrated by something, or my kid may have fallen off the swing, and the environment changes my thinking. AI, on the other hand, is more consistent. It's not affected by its environment. However, it doesn't have a moral compass, right? It doesn't have that fire in the belly or the passion. So, in effect, when we treat AI as teammates, AI can make us better, and then we can make AI better when we use it responsibly.
Yeah, some great takeaways there. One, like the context to your point, a lot of the LLMs are trained on universal models. I think kind of the examples and what you're doing with establishing context, that's an important takeaway. And then I think the other is kind of how to use these tools when you think of a persona and use cases for that persona. And in your example, you're cloning yourself to a degree. I love that. So a lot of great insights there. We probably have time for one more question before we get to the broader panel. As I mentioned kind of earlier in our latest report, kind of buyers, as it relates to buyers, kind of the use of AI as a resource in kind of their journey, it's doubled year over year. And 62% of those buyers say they fact checked AI sources. So kind of what's your perspective on this? Do you think buyers are truly kind of trusting or needing to validate that information? Or is fact checking often just clicking through a citation with deeper scrutiny?
So I think it's less about the 62%. I think the amount of fact checking will decline over time, because we will begin to start trusting more, right? So I liken this to traditional Google search. How many times have we actually gone to the second page of Google?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Rarely, right? Because we like the shortcut. We like the I see Viola nodding her head. We like the shortcut, right?
Yeah.
We take the first, maybe up to the third answer above the fold. We never click to the second page of Google. I think at some point we're going to get an AI response. It's a direct answer to our question, and that's it. We won't even click on the citations,
Yeah.
right? And we will just take AI's response as reality. And I've said this before that, in the past, perception is reality. Moving forward, the AI response will be reality.
Yeah, that's probably a good punctuation point. All right, so a lot more trust in AI, And we're seeing it. We're seeing it by what buyers are telling us today. So, okay, Lisa, this is great. A lot of wonderful insights there. So I think we're at the point, if we can bring all of the speakers on stage, we are going to start taking questions from the audience here. All right, we've got Drew and we've got Viola. Okay, great. I think we're all here. And hopefully we don't have any clones right now showing up. So, all right. So we've got a number of questions kind of queued up here, and I realize maybe some of these have been answered in the chat, but let's start with the first one. So kind of how does, and I think this goes to kind of Viola, maybe what you were talking about. How does feeding LLMs with content or information about your brand impact your ability for your brand to rank in search? Does it affect the ability to rank in LLMs at all?
I was advocating for that question because Drew was also talking about it, and that was also a question in the chat. And so Drew, I'm very curious on your opinion, but I think as a baseline, right, we know LLMs learn off training data. We know that LLMs with search learn off that training data and they pull in search data. So whether they, using Bing or like searching, scraping. And then what I thought is interesting is because I've heard so many people that they put their own content in the hope that the model gets trained. So I think one thing that happens, your own ChatGPT gets familiar to you, gets personalized, gets to know you. So that's one thing that's happening. And then if you go to your ChatGPT settings, there's a setting that says improve the model for everyone. And then it says allow your content to be used to train our model, which makes ChatGPT better for you and everyone who uses it. And I'll put the link to the documentation. Now, the question is, how do they prioritize that? Do they use it a little bit? Do they use it a lot? But there seems to be some truth to this. I don't think we know the degree of how helpful this really is. I don't know, Drew, if you know more about this.
Exactly right. I think there's some anecdotal experiences where folks had done it. The problem with it, though, is that we all have our unique experiences with every generative AI. There is, again, no sort of search where you can do incognito. It knows where you are. It knows who you are. Even if you're in incognito, it knows. So it's already trained on you. So it's very hard to create these. And I'm sure people solved it, but still, for the average user, you can't replicate anything because it's always giving you a customized experience. I mean, Lisa had to tell it to be critical, right? And with her twin. So I don't think it's a bad idea. It may be that you're putting a drop of water in an ocean. You may be putting a drop of water in a cup. We don't know. We don't know, but it doesn't seem like it's a bad thing if every single one of your employees actually put in something like, hey, our company is number one in this thing, and you have 2,000 employees, and they all did it on their own. And then you kept asking, so who's number two?
Right.
You would think that in theory it might happen. It's just nobody knows yet. It's still early days.
Totally. And the caveat is probably if you even consider doing that, which again, I don't know how useful, probably you want to use your public facing documents first.
Right.
I don't know how your IT and security team feels about putting internal documents in there. So just going to put that disclaimer out.
Yep.
That's an important point. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. And I think there was some discussion on this next question in the chat, but we wanted to open up to the panel and hear from kind of the rest of the panel. But I think the question is, which LLM monitoring tool would you recommend? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Over to you, Viola. I have no idea.
I have an opinion. So I just gotta okay, so one type of user we can track with a high level of certainty, which is the user that sees you featured in an LLM answer and then chooses to click. Because these people that show up in your website analytics tools, your GA4, your HubSpot, under referral traffic from ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. So I put a dashboard in the chat that people can use, so you can look in your own, referral traffic sources. But of course, that's only a fraction. Most people probably have a zero-click search. We did this by hand almost a year ago. Luckily, we don't have to do this by hand anymore. There's two startups that I quite like. One is ziptie.dev, one is peak.ai. There's others. I'm sure a category leader will emerge from this. I know SEMrush and Ahrefs are dying to catch up and have that functionality. Caveat, if you use these, you put in prompts. So that removes the bias of using your own ChatGPT to track these mentions. It does not remove the bias that you're the one saying, please monitor this prompt. It's not a real person that's really searching. It's you saying to the tool, please monitor this prompt. But at least it monitors it at scale for you. So you don't have to do that per hand anymore.
Okay, great. All right, here's another question. I'll call it a spicy question. I want to hear kind of from each of the panel members on this one. So with the rise of kind of AI getting better at answering customer questions and in enabling self-discovery, do you envision a day when salespeople become obsolete? Let's start with you, Lisa.
Yeah, so no. But it's a very nuanced question, right? Like, I get super introspective with these kinds of questions because it is a huge part of this is going to be that our biggest currency or our most valuable currency will be trust. So it almost doesn't matter how far or how good AI gets. It will be our ability to trust technology that will determine how much we essentially allow AI into our lives, right? And that trust component will vary depending on person, depending on the industry, the segment, what it is that we're going to trust AI with, right? Like, hey, I might trust AI to, sign me up for a webinar. But will I trust AI to manage my portfolio and my finances? No, I still want to have a human being with me. Will I trust AI to do my healthcare? No. Right. Well, at least today, right? Like I'm saying these things based on what I trust today. I mean, 20 years ago, there was no way in hell was I getting in a stranger's car. And no way in hell was I going to let any stranger sleep on my bed. Right. But now look at us. we blindly get into a stranger's car. So I know that this will change. So I do believe that the trust element will be the key that decides when and where the human being, whether it's a salesperson, an advisor, a consultant, will still be part of our lives.
I think there's a couple of things that with every sort of trend, there's a counter trend. There will be, years ago, Alvin Toffler talked about high tech, high touch. There will be companies that have a competitive advantage as a result of having 100% human sales force. And they will still be building relationships. And by the way, like champion tracking is important. Their connection is with that individual as much as it is with the company. So that you're not going to have relationships with a bot where you're so enamored with it, a sales bot that you're going to say, oh my God, I got to keep working with you. Other than Lisa's digital twin, that I want to keep working with. But so I think the answer is, the more complex the sale, the more likely that there will be human involvement. I think most salespeople are not worth this. I mean, I'm sorry, but a lot of them are really not very good. They're not empathetic. They're not solving the problem. They're just saying, can we write it up? And so there's going to be this moment where these LLMs are helping these salespeople be incredible. The ones that do keep their jobs. And it's the equivalent of a factory worker who has robotic arms on top of it, allows that individual to lift more. Yeah. I think you're going to have super salesmen who are using these things.
That's a great point. All right, Viola, you want to kind of bring us home with kind of your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think to Drew's point, I think there will always be a market for where we want that in person. That being said, to come back to the kind of like self-educate, like how much of the funnel and research and decision-making process can be self-educated in conversation with a bot. And I think that's going to be a lot more than we even think about today.
All right. I think that brings us to time. I want to thank our panel and all the speakers, and definitely encourage kind of all attendees to go. I mean, we're scratching the surface with insights from these leaders. So definitely go follow Lisa on Growth Path Partners, go follow Drew on CMO Huddles, and go follow Viola on Flow Agency. So thank you all. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Viola. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate your time. And for the attendees, I think we are posting a recording of this after as well. And I think there's some resources that have been provided as links here as well. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Thank you.